Thinking about art as a journey, probably most of us don't think of art as a journey when we started. I mean, getting in the boat, I would say maybe people think you sort of discover that you're in the boat. I mean, what do you think about that? Where did it start? Let me just throw it out. Anybody who wants to start, Tam?
A conversation that I had when I was in the middle of a very difficult novel, which is to say a novel. And I was having this conversation with a poet friend, and I said, I feel like I'm in a boat in the middle of the ocean and there's no land in sight. And he said, yeah, and you're building the boat. That's what came to mind when you said that.
A metaphor, which is for the spiritual journey, which is one that I took up, and if you stay after this, you'll see in the gallery, which is, doesn't have a boat, but it's called the Ox Herding Series. And if you imagine you were in 12th century China and you lost your ox, I mean, this is your livelihood. The fields that need to be plowed, the manure, everything is the most valuable possession you could ever have. And so you have to go off and search for this ox. And all you have is a whip and a tether, and you have no idea where to go. I mean, you have to just head off into the mountains. So that's that artistic journey or spiritual journey. You're just taking off, and you have no idea. You're lost, and you're so lost that you're not even paying attention to like the birds that are around or what might be accompanying you on this journey. But gradually, in this journey of the ox herding, you do see some traces, and that becomes very helpful. You see footprints of the ox, and that is the second stage. So you're not lost forever. I was thinking of that boat, and I wonder, what are those first traces that you realize, yeah, I can do this, and what are the first things that you hold on to that keep you going?
Recognize that it's something different from what other people are doing. When was that first thing for you?
Me, the first moment that I hark back to is the instrumental bridge of the song My Girl by the Temptations. It's not the singing, and it isn't the songwriting. It's the brass and the strings. And there's a moment when they stop singing and the orchestra takes over. And I remember I'm in a car, and it's in Hull, Massachusetts, when I first heard that, and I took off through the car. In my brain, it was an explosion for me. And I knew that I belonged inside that music, that I was going to pursue what it took to create that moment that was coming through the car when I'm a little kid, like maybe 9. And it's been playing out ever since. I still want to pursue that moment of the instrumental bridge in My Girl. Yeah. I've come from a big family, and an older brother that he's still around, and he's still is a better singer than me, better accompanist on piano. He's more natural at writing music, and he's a much better ear for music. And I think that was a big impetus for me too, is that I just wanted to participate in his world.
Well, I don't come from a theater family, but I directed my first show when I was 7 years old. So something pulled me along. How did it happen?
Yeah.
I'm so embarrassed to tell this story because I repeat it all the time. I guess it's pretty cool, but I saw the Olympics on TV, the opening ceremonies, and I asked for my family to explain it to me. And they did, and then I organized the Olympics on the streets. Cut cardboard medals, lit the torch on top of grandmother's house, organized long-distance spitting and other games. Oh my God. And at the end, all of the children had to, I rigged it so I would win the most gold medals, and then they all had to carry me down the street. So that started a career in opera and Shakespeare, because it was an epic undertaking from the beginning. And at one point, when I started thinking of it as a journey, years later, I remember calming down. Because I always had definite, aspirations and ambitions, but I realized that there was no definite goal, that there was kind of a continuity, and that was very, very comfortable. From that point on, I kind of calmed down.
Opposite end of the scale. Sure. You were at the Olympics, and you were a bridge that wasn't even sort of the main focus of a piece of pop music.
Yeah.
But you both had a kind of glimpse of
Sure.
an infinite landscape out in front of you that way, that started out. Linda, what would you say was it when you first sort of were touched by whatever it is?
I can't really think of a moment, but I knew I would be an artist. I mean, I just had somehow this sense that, I don't know, if they had more fun or they had paint on their clothes or, I don't really know, but it did, I realized that they got to think about the important questions, and that's all I cared to think about. That was, and so it seemed like that was a way to find some answers.
Well, the theater was I almost feel like I can't include that in my journey because it was so not where I belonged, and it wasn't an artistic or spiritual impulse. It was more like accident. Where I was just.
Well, that can be a valuable thing. How did you know that it was wrong? I mean, what?
Oh, I felt like I was wearing the wrong size clothing and shoes and everything. It just was a real discomfort. Not being home in myself, not being home in my body, not being home on stage, being tremendously self-conscious and not being able to sort of get out of my own way and also not wanting it. Actually, I mean, really, ultimately, I think when people say to me things like, you must be so disciplined, to sit down every day and write, the question used to sort of bother me in some way because I wasn't sure how to even respond to it. And what I realized is, no, it's just so much easier for me to write than not write. When I am not writing, I am not well. When I'm not working and engaged in a piece of work. So I really think I was sort of unwell until I was probably 27 years old and started writing my first novel and understood that that's actually what I was and what I did. But I didn't know growing up that I could be a writer. I didn't grow up knowing any artists or my parents. I grew up in suburban New Jersey. I was not surrounded by artists at all. And it really wasn't until I was in college and then I left for a while and then I came back, left for a while being the acting moment. And I saw, for the first time, I connected in my mind that these books that I read, that I lived inside of, were actually written by someone that spent their lives doing that. And the first light bulb was, oh, that is possible. And then the next one eventually was, that's possible for me. I mean, so much of that for me had to do with permission, the feeling like that I could have a voice, feeling like I had a story to tell. And I actually wasn't ready to tell it. I wasn't ready to tell it for another 10 years. But it was having that, I was in graduate school and I kept on writing the same short story over and over and over again, sort of one iteration of it, one failed iteration after another. And I find as a teacher sometimes that I will scribble something in the margin of a student's work and it'll be something no big deal for me and it'll be something sort of earth-shattering for the student. And what that was from my teacher at the time was, I really think it's on to the novel. Just onto the novel, and I had never thought, oh, I could be a novelist, I could write a novel. And I began working on that material as a novel, which eventually became my graduate thesis, which eventually became my first novel. Mentors that just, several of them, that I really felt very guided by and cosseted by almost.
Well, let's talk about that second stage then. We've got the artists do cooler things, we've got the Olympics, we've got the Temptations, and we've got the not acting as the first. What was then? What channeled you after that? What got you pointed to wherever it is that you have been or now? Anybody jump in?
I think I've been really lucky because there was a mentor in every phase of my life. And some of them were in theater, some of them were in dance, puppetry, mask. And I knew that eventually it would all lead to directing, but I did many other things just to beef up my set of skills. But But I think, that's something that I'm most grateful for in my life.
So
every step of the way there were people, because it's different. Being a mentor is different, I think, than being a teacher, because it's somebody who really takes a deeper look. And it's a complicated relationship because eventually you have to tear yourself away from your mentor.
That's great.
They did not want to let go,
Yeah.
but at some point you have to leave, and it's not always easy.
That's great. What do you guys think about that? Did you have that experience?
Well, I never had that. I mean, I had it when I was a kid. As I mentioned, I had an older brother, and I had the same experience where, at a certain point, I had to break away in the same. It was familial, so it was that much more difficult. But I would want to speak to this in another way. Being that what I have always done is film scoring, it took a while to come to that. Nobody is a kid and thinks they want to grow up and write music that people aren't going to notice is playing when they're listening to it. So it took a long time to kind of find my way into this as a career path. But as I've been preparing to come here, I did want to mention something I hadn't thought about in a long time, which was when I first came to New York, my early 20s, it was when Merrily We Roll Along just opened. It was actually in previews on Broadway, and it was, I'm sure many of you know what that is. It's a Stephen Sondheim play directed by Hal Prince. And a friend and I went to previews, and we thought it was great, but I knew that it was troubled and I could fix it. And so I wrote a letter to Hal Prince. I'm 22 or 23, whatever I was. But I knew that I had definite ideas about how I was going to fix it because I could see it was in trouble. And as you know, everybody knows, it did not do very well.
No, that's right.
They've tried to bring it back maybe a couple of times.
They did.
Anyway, so, but here's the thing, this is part of the story I want to tell. So I wrote a letter. I'm living in Prince Street at the time in a loft where there was no public entrance. I don't know how this happened, but I wrote the letter. The very next day, there was hand-delivered under my door a beautiful piece of stationery. It was like from the desk of Hal Prince. And I don't know how the person who delivered got in. I don't know how they found my door, but they did, and it just simply it said, "Thank you for yours, Hal Prince." And that made me feel like, I must be doing something right. He didn't take my direction, he didn't use my ideas, but he responded to me. I connected to this guy that was an idol, was incredibly accomplished, and I'm so green and just new to New York. But it was a moment which made me feel like I'm doing something right.
Yeah. Something legitimate that somebody responded to,
Yeah.
even if they didn't agree with it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you were on the right path.
Yeah.
Linda, was there a moment for you like that, or a person like that for you?
I would say that what happened for me was I spent 2 years studying in Japan, studying the Noh theater, training with a teacher, an actor. And he was incredible in terms of sharing everything he could, and I couldn't speak the language. So this was like imitation. I mean, I was learning as a child learns to dance and to sing these old texts. And those 2 years, it was after college, I had a grant to be there. It was in Kyoto. I was just completely changed by that experience. I had grown up in suburbia. No one in my family cared about nature. And here I was in this country and in this world where poetry and the natural world, I was totally transformed. And so I came back from there like fueled and changed, and I knew I had to express this. And so the big challenge and what took a long time, I think, and maybe I'm still doing that, is just how to express that in what medium, because I came back without, I couldn't go do the Noh theater here. You don't perform it by yourself. You need a whole chorus and actors and costumes and masks. So, but I had something that I knew I wanted to express, and I think that's really what carried me.
But Darko, you say you always knew you wanted, even though you did different things, it was always going to be directing.
Sure. It was pretty calculated. It was pretty. I just thought I should. I thought. I've directed, plays, musicals, and operas, and I've always managed to gravitate towards the best offers in any given fields that came along, and part of it is because, studying music, dance, puppetry, mask, so they're all resources now, so, right now I'm choreographing my first ballet. One point, I'm trained in modern dance, I've never studied ballet, but in The Tempest, there are the three goddesses, and we're doing it as a ballet, and it's a wonderful challenge. It's great, but I didn't think that I was going to be doing it a month ago. So, if your vocabulary is broad enough, then you can refashion yourself. And that's what keeps me going. So.
Now, what about changes of direction? When you got back to America and there was no theater here for you to do, what happened?
I was lost. It was a very hard time. I took some modern dance classes, and I kind of was just looking around. I thought if I found some other people to work with, but I did make a Christmas present for my then husband. It was a line of poetry, which was, "The line never ceases to meet." And I wanted to give it to him in some tangible form, some physical form. And so I grabbed some cloth, and it was a beautiful white homespun cloth, and made a large panel with some lines on it, and wrote the text, that line, in cloth. And I was so satisfied doing that. It was so wonderful that I made several more, and then I just continued, and I went out and bought some other colors of fabrics and put them together, and then added objects, and really that's how I became a sculptor, because the objects, I added natural objects. I mean, that's what I cared about. They became so large they came off the wall, and then I was suddenly doing three-dimensional work. But it was pretty serendipitous that I found a way that I could express what I wanted to in myself, working in my studio.
Let me ask you that, all of you. Now we're sort of into the second stage of wherever it is that you are. Was there a time when, I think of this for myself, was there a time when you had a doubt about whether you should be doing something else?
Well, for me, every few years I seem to need to take a step back, and I need to not be a director for a little while. And it's very beneficial. So, I don't know, what I do, right now I'm directing The Tempest, so it's 17 actors. Mm-hmm. Stage managers, the design team, the whole company. So people are looking at every day for answers. Some of them are very, very practical answers. Sets needs to be built, costumes need to be made. So I'm always on a schedule, so I can be lost privately. But I can't be lost, up to a point with the rehearsal schedules. I cannot be lost in front of them, because it makes people feel too insecure. so I can, I have my own demons at 1 a.m. usually. But a couple of years ago, I just decided that I needed to not direct for 6 months. And I joined a rock climbing gym, and I started doing this rigorous exercise program, and I started doing some trapeze, and everything comes back. I read this line, in Muriel Sparks said that in the life of an artist, nothing is ever wasted. So, now I'm directing The Tempest, and there's this issue of Prospero's books, and the set designer designed these beautiful curved bookcases that are about 20 feet tall, and I was looking at them, and I was like, could some of the books stick out, and could we turn it into a rock climbing wall? So basically we have spirits racing up the bookcases, and any excuse, any moment I'm out of the shop, I'm climbing bookcases, And so it comes back for me in a very practical way, with a trapeze thing, that's also a part of it, and so I find things that, lately I'm really interested in this issue of actors and endurance, like because everybody wants to be very fit in theater profession these days. So I was like, well, I might as well use it. So you know, everything comes back.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not in a way spiritually that much of a departure from what you're doing.
Oh, no.
And trapeze. Anybody know who Henry Nouwen is?
Yeah.
Or was? Henry Nouwen was a wonderful spiritual writer, and he wrote about, he studied trapeze, and he said the guy who was teaching him said, just remember, don't try to catch the catcher. You know, the catcher who catches.
Yeah.
He said that, and in a way, that's sort of what we're all doing. But the point of my question was, but that wasn't really a step away. That was just sort of another stage in what you're doing.
You know, there was a moment I was like, I need to not be directing people right now. It's not a safe time for me. I'm not going to be much good.
But you knew you were going to go back.
Oh yes, but you know,
That's what I'm talking
yeah,
about.
yeah.
How about anybody else?
I'm sorry.
I had what really felt like a crisis of, you know, as artists, we are our own instrument. So, you know, when life happens to us, it changes the instrument. When there's a crisis in a family, a death, an illness, and when my son was sick as an infant, 1999, I remember, and he was very sick, and we didn't know if he would be okay, and there was really about a 6 or 8 month period of time of that, and I would go. I would go up to we were living in Brooklyn, and I would go up to my office, and I would sit there, and I would just think, I write fiction. I mean, it felt like the most frivolous, impossible. I couldn't imagine what I would ever feel I could write about again. I wanted to go to medical school. I wanted to go invent a medication. These, of course, being things that I had no skill set for whatsoever. And what eventually happened was that in the shift in me internally, my next novel eventually, which was family history, eventually rose up out of those circumstances, and I ended up writing about the only thing that was obsessing me at the time, which was maternal anxiety, and what do you do with the fact that you can't protect your child, and so it became a kind of a turning point, or not a turn, but just a moment where my work shifted because of that. But there was quite a long, it was 5 years between my memoir Slow Motion and family history, and part of that time can be accounted for as me sitting there thinking, I don't know, and actually the way I got back to work was I was having coffee with a friend of mine. My son, just before he had been diagnosed with this condition, had actually been dropped down the stairs by his babysitter, which was not connected to the condition that he had. And I was having coffee with a friend of mine, and I said, I haven't written a word since Jacob fell down the stairs. And she said, that's your first sentence.
Oh, that's great.
And I went home and I wrote an essay that ended up in Plowshares, the first sentence of which was, I haven't written a word since Jay fell down the stairs.
That's great.
And it required, again, you know, that thing, whether it's a mentor or it's a colleague, it's a friend, it's a moment of somebody mirroring it back to you and saying, this is what you're saying, this is what I'm hearing. You know, you're a writer, go write.
You know, the point of creativity, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole set of things that allow you to keep doing what you do. Maybe the best way to describe it is just a technique. There's a whole range of techniques. But one thing that I always kept in mind is this idea of there's a triangle, which has to do with performing, which doesn't necessarily mean you know, sitting down and singing a song, but for me it might mean the red light's on in a recording studio and I have to get the take and there's a limited amount of time. The performing, so there's the directness of that, and then the other parts of the triangle are studying, that you gotta keep immersing yourself in new stuff. You have to keep learning, getting deeper into whatever it is that you want to study. And then the other part of it is teaching. If you manage to keep all those things going, it keeps you buoyant, because all those things feed around. It's a thing that kind of loops around, and that has always worked for me. If one thing feels a little bit lacking, I may lean on the other two a little bit more, and I find that that just kind of keeps the balance.
Called The Art Spirit by Robert Henry, the artist and teacher, and he said in that book, he said, I have little interest in teaching you what I know. What I want is to inspire you to teach me what you know. So there's a kind of biology that is operative there.
Yeah.
I think that my life has always been quite complex in terms of the activities that are in front of me, and so I would, if I do go do something else, I guess is what I'd say, rather than go into the studio. Like I don't spend a lot of time in my studio not knowing what to do. Like when I'm in there, it's filled with materials, and I put them together, I work with them, but to get in there is sometimes very difficult. But then I have an orchard, so we're growing organic apples, and all winter they need to be pruned, so I'm kind of doing sculpture in the orchard, and there's weeding in the raspberry patch, or kids, and there's a lot of other activities that I do, so I don't have that like single line focus, which sometimes I feel like I would be much better if I did, but it just doesn't happen to be who I am or my life that I do. And even when I'm working, I have a number of projects always going at the same time, and I go from one to the next, and they feed each other. I was in Japan, I lived in this little temple. I heard this chanting, when I was so young there, but I was not studying Zen. The No Theater is a Zen art, and I came back, and I was married, and I had my kids, and I always wanted, I'm sure, to follow in that, to train, to follow in a spiritual search, a commitment. And so it was after my children were really almost out of the house that in some way, I guess I had that space to take it up and started and became a student at Zen Mountain Monastery, which is in Mount Tremper, New York. And so that kind of work, and that with a teacher and my sitting practice, it's really the maypole about which everything else happens now. There's nothing as important to me because it's learning to be alive and to be a person, and how to be alive in this world and handle everything that comes and make good decisions that are going to benefit others, and just how to live wisely, compassionately, all those things that that's really where my my commitment is. And so the art making doesn't right now I guess I can say this because I don't have a project that I'm like totally engrossed in, so there's that freedom. If I had one, maybe it would be different, but and I'm sure that will come, but I don't worry about it, because it's the other that's really the core.